is the business of content, sharing insights and lessons to help companies maximize the ROI from their content marketing. It's a higher level. This is the business of content, and this is your host, Lloyd Silver.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Content. I'm Lloyd Silver. Joining me today is Jeff Coyle. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm great. I'm so pumped to get to connect and talk today. It's going to be a fun topic.
Yes, I think it is. So Jeff, you're the co-founder, you're the chief strategy officer over at MarketMuse. Real quickly, what does MarketMuse do and what problem are you trying to solve out there, just at a high level?
Sure. We're a content intelligence SaaS platform that really sets the standard for content quality. What we're trying to do is improve, content teams' efficiencies, help them with execution of content. And we do so by providing insights like, how hard is it going to be for us to own this specific topic? What pages should I create? What pages should I update? We take it to the next stage and we actually build out content briefs for teams so that they can adopt single sources of truth for their teams. We also kind of accelerate the most common workflows like updating existing content, internal and external linking recommendations, and just generally doing research that's focused on expertise and not just focused on keywords, which, you got to be focused on building the best stuff to win. And everything we've always done is focused on setting the standard for content quality.
So that's a lot of good stuff there. Let's try to narrow this down and have an interesting conversation about at least part of it, because we could probably talk for hours about this. So
For sure.
What do you think is the single biggest problem or the single biggest impediment as it relates to companies creating good content?
Gosh, there's so many pieces, and sometimes that idea changes every day, but it's really about prioritization of what they're going to write, what they're going to update, and then understanding that they need great coverage that covers the journey that they're focused on. So everybody in their particular, target audience, they need to be that thought leader. They need to be the expert. They need to have the content that's there when and where it's needed at this moment in time. And I think the biggest kind of issue is when somebody thinks they can knock that out with one page, they're very, very mistaken. They need to be thinking critically about coverage levels, and about the different types of levels of expertise, the different types of roles, different types of industries. And I think that's where a lot of kind of people who have crossed the chasm from SEO into content influence the teams towards one page when they really need content packages to exhibit their expertise.
Let's dive into the prioritization part.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So first of all, what do you mean by prioritization?
So with the way that I think about it is I need to know how much content is needed in order to kind of put together a package that tells the story that I'm an expert. And so when I prioritize, I want to be thinking about the why. And so one thing that MarketMuse really focuses on, it's the why for any content plan. So why am I creating this? Why is this the most important page for me to create right now? And trying to help teams create repeatable plan dimensions or processes. So most plans fit into, a handful of buckets. It's, quick wins. You got to put points on the board. What pages should I update today that are going to have the most meaningful upside or impact on my business? Growth, traffic, conversions, right? Or what pages should I create that are going to have the biggest impact, or they're the biggest opportunity for one reason or another? And when I say reason, I'm typically talking about one data point or a combination of data points. But there's also whys that are related to, business goals. I want to own this topic. We need to grow these particular metrics. Or risks, like I have a big competitor that's changed their strategy, or I've got a page that, generates, a lot of people go red in the face when I say this, generates too much of my traffic or too many of my leads. How do I bolster that page? How do I make sure that that isn't a house of cards waiting to get beaten up, or so that like my entire company is, living and dying by one page, or even sadly one search term. In a lot of cases, that's not so far-fetched. So prioritization can also mean, depending on your org, it could mean just following orders. You take orders from everyone on your team, and you got to put your best foot forward and start to build this infrastructure where you can give feedback on prioritization. And the way you do that is by putting your best foot forward every time you hit publish. And so prioritizing content is to say, I'm confident that if we do this for this reason, we're going to be able to put points on the board. We're going to achieve the goal that we're having. And that allows me to say, we should do this today. We need this much content, and start to put, predictive ROI into motion. So prioritizing is really, I'm confident in my percentage win rate. I'm confident that I need to do this much work today, and I can put together an editorial plan that's not just based on subjectivity.
So it seems like, if I'm hearing you the right way, that prioritization in your mind, you're really looking at, I can break it up into maybe two different areas. You've got the data points, right? I mean, there's always going to be data involved, but there's also that qualitative aspect, which the why question addresses. So for every piece of content, if somebody comes to you, you've got, an SEO expert on the team that comes to you and says, hey, we need to publish this. Well, why? Like, that's the first question to be asking, why?
And that brings the team. At first, it feels like that might bring the teams apart, having to have that that justification. But what we find is that it actually brings the teams together, because historically, everybody's why has always been different. It's, I think this is, we need more bottom of the funnel content, I think, because that generates leads. Or this has the highest search volume. That's what the kind of SEOs of yore used to say, right? Or the editorial team saying, I just like this, or I'm an expert on this, But when you start to have to put those things into motion or make them work together, you start to say, oh, well, I know our goal here is to grow our authority on this topic, so that, frankly, it makes our life easier every time we publish an article about this. What's that entire plan look like? You start to think of all the people are also on that team are contributing to that final product, instead of just trying to fight for resources. And I think that that's really what the big difference here is. It's, you're not fighting for your KPI. You're trying to align against the same KPIs, the same data points that might influence the why. And there's room for each one of those pieces in that plan. There's actually probably a need for each of them. And most importantly, there's the need for that subject matter expert and editorial leadership to have the data behind their subjective measures, so they can say, I want to create this plan. Can you predict how successful it's going to be? And the SEO might say, well, yeah, if you just knock that out with a page and it's not all that comprehensive, I'm not thinking it's going to be very impactful. But if we add some of these pages that target these other stages of the buy cycle or these other intents, we could actually have a meaningful impact on lead gen with this campaign. We could address the middle of the funnel, which we are gapped because we tend to focus on awareness-based content. And then the demand gen set team says, yes, and we really have the need to grow leads from these industries. Well, when you have that orchestration, and it's all relying on the same data set, fun stuff starts to happen.
And I wrote down the word that you used, at least a fragment of, which was alignment. So the question of why, while it might seem challenging, is really, it is a challenge, but it's a challenge to make sure that the entire team, we're all in alignment with one another, and we're all trying to work towards those company goals.
Exactly right. And the things that, like, signals of misalignment, I tend to hear on teams are words like SEO content. That's always an example of misalignment that I search for in my brain, or passion content or social content. Typically that variant is like an emotionally loaded variant, emotionally loaded adjective that tells the story of misalignment. And it's not, all boats aren't rising. And, those are the types of businesses where when you do have a win, everybody wants to take credit for it too. And so it's one of those situations where alignment really matters. And what, the punchline here is, especially if you're fighting in red ocean, where there's a lot of competition, if all those types of content, if all, whether it be, high cost, super high production value, or, just today's blog, if all those things aren't working together, you will not have any longevity at the head of these topics. And the teams that are winning are the ones that kind of execute on all fronts and also have a great update and optimization cadence. So those are all practices where, healthy teams are prioritizing with that why, and they're getting behind each other's wins. So that, because they know, like, if the SEO team is right here, the next awareness phase content item I write, the next guide I write can have a chance to make us twice as much money or attract, 10 times the number of email subscribers, whatever it is your goal is, sell the most tents if you're an e-commerce shop. But no matter what it is, I think if people are thinking more along the lines of aligned whys, they win more often.
And one phrase that you used in that, which I hear all the time, and I have the same reaction as you, is SEO content. I think that deserves talking about specifically for a few minutes, because we all have conversations with like CEOs and CMOs of companies that say, hey, I want to bolster my SEO content. It's deflating when I hear that. They don't get it. But how can we help them get it? So what are some of the things that you would say to that person?
I mean, first of all, I'm an SEO, right? I've been doing
this
since
that's my background. Yep.
2000. I'm wearing a Google Dance 2006 shirt, so I love it. I think it's one of the most amazing things. It's like putting together puzzles all day. I mean, it is really, that's the game, right? But when you hear that SEO content, it's a disparaging phrase. It means it's lesser than some other form of creative writing, of narrative, of storytelling, of buy cycle coverage. It's the stuff you have to do, or it's perceived as something that you have to do, or even using it as a verb, or SEO this, and typically that's a signal that there's an SEO edit in place, which actually pulls the heart out of your writer's chest, shows it to them, throws it in the garbage, or your editorial leads. It's so deflating. And what I'm so happy that the world is changing to kind of start thinking about authoritativeness as being a requirement. And so for that CEO, what I'm typically talking to them about is often, a couple dimensions. One is, when we have people going to a web page on our site that represents our brand, if our content is not providing isn't satisfying the need of why they landed there, that's not a good representation of our brand. We're not making that person a happy person, right? We're not making them a successful person. And part of that is providing information gain. Part of that is providing satisfaction for their specific intents. And so a lot of where content strategy and SEO should be combining is identifying those cases where maybe we have mismatch. People are landing on our homepage. They're looking for something. They can't find it on our site. It's a usability transition. So SEO content, that's really something that should be taken out of kind of and it should be thinking about kind of intent matching, or customer journey success, or a really getting aligned with the editorial vision or the brand vision, because the content that will perform an organic search and lead to the success or the information gain, or the where I'm getting someone further along in the journey, That's all of our content. That's the goal of marketing. And the fact that it's optimized for organic search has to be table stakes. If it's not table stakes, then we have a problem. Everything needs to exhibit our expertise, and exhibiting your expertise is what search engine optimization is all about. And there's nothing tricky about that. And I think people want it to be easy. They want to put it in a box. They want it to be lower quality because they just naturally feel like they like to read content that inspires them. They like to read content that seems creative. But the punchline here is the stuff that inspires them and can be creative can also be optimized. And that's the trick, and that's what CEOs need to realize. Yeah.
Well, and it's maybe a slight nuance here, and it gets back to the why question. But when you talk about SEO content, so if somebody's talking SEO content, the why is we want better organic rankings.
Right.
Okay, that's the why. Now, if you change that around to intent matching, which is, we can talk about, there's various ways of describing it, but okay, this is awareness stage content. The why is to make more people aware of our brand and our products and our services. Exactly. Right? How do we do that? Well, organic ranking can certainly help with that, but if it ends with that and we just drive in that traffic and we're not accomplishing that awareness goal. Exactly. They have found us, but they're not truly aware of us because they're not going to come back. They're not having a relationship unless we do something on that page to engage and excite and show our expertise, as you said.
You couldn't have said it better in that that's where the teams can get aligned. It's that, and this is where kind of certain types of SEOs have problems because they're not critically thinking about this. They're only focused on that ranking. And what you end up with sometimes are teams that fight over keywords. I've worked with companies where they're like, no, my team owns this word. We are the only ones that get to write about it. And we're focused on this stage of the funnel. Or, our awareness phase content is getting all the traffic. And that's not turning into leads. They're not thinking critically that your goal is to provide the value and then get that trust so that someone wants to take the next step, to answer the next 5 questions, so that when they are further down the journey, you have influenced them. And all of that is the goal. Because you're getting that first view, you're getting that first experience. That first experience can actually be anywhere in the funnel. That's the other piece. You don't get to escort them the way that you want to escort them. If you're in B2B tech, if you don't think people go to G2 Crowd, if you don't think people go to Trust Radius, you've lost your mind, right? That's part of their journey too, and you don't get to influence that. Oh no. Well, hey, why don't you want to influence as many of those experiences as possible? Because that's when you start to win more. You're not leaving it in the hands of someone else to do your job for you. You can control that. And I think that's where, demand gen teams get it wrong. They're focused only on the bottom of the funnel. They're focused on conversion rates. They're not realizing that without the rest of that journey covered, they're in trouble. And that's where SEO teams get it wrong if they're focused on search volume. Because first of all, search volume is not predictive, which that's another topic for another day, or maybe for today, if you want to get into it. But it also leads people to, think only about the KPI of top line entrances when that doesn't always tell the story of long-term success. So.
And the term that comes to my mind, and it certainly applies to that SEO professional, it applies to the demand team, but it's the necessity of being that T-level marketer. You may have that expertise in SEO, but if you don't have at least basic understanding and the other components of marketing and how what you have the expertise on impacts that, you're really missing the boat there. So as a company, and you're hiring people, I think it's the company's job, whoever's handling the training and development, to turn these people into more of that T-level marketer, where now they'll have a better understanding of how their specific responsibility impacts the entire company and how they have to work with other people.
Yeah, and one of my favorite, I actually have 2 fun phrases when about that. One is if you don't understand, empathize, right? So if you don't really get what they do every day and what they care about, you've got to at least you don't know how to do it. So you got to really do the hard work of trying to put yourself in their shoes, and that's tough to do. And the other thing I used to say to my team at Tech Target is, I'm cool with the T's, but I want y'all to be squares, right? Get as close to a square as you can, and that's your career development, so that you can kind of go anywhere and be that chameleon, the marketer. And the T-shaped marketer is a beautiful thing, and being a square is kind of aspirational, but it's important to know where you are on each one of those skill sets, so that you don't assume the way that someone else feels on your team. And that's really when kind of the tough stuff happens. And that's where the conflict occurs. Is, early in my career, I feel like I thought I was more intelligent about editorial and about writing and about content strategy in general, because I wasn't putting myself in their shoes as much as I should have, where they had grown up in a world without a lot of this data. The only way they survived was with subjective decisions and subject matter expertise, and almost like being a tarot card reader, without the deck, right? And that skill is so valuable. And only after working with some of the best editorial leadership in the world was I able to say, oh my gosh, the real trick here, if you're an SEO or a demand gen lead, is to harness their expertise and use it to raise all boats. And so those are the types of experiences that I really push SEOs that I talk to be thinking critically about, whether they're thinking about sales enablement, or editorial, or product marketing. And I think that's really what shapes teams into being shapes SEO teams into being really content strategy leaders. So
let's dive into the area of expert authoritativeness. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's going to also tie back to one of the first things that you said, which was coverage. Mm-hmm. So talk to me a little bit about that. What's coverage, and how does that relate to becoming an authority in a particular topic?
Yeah, sure. So when I talk about coverage, one thing that MarketMuse does is we have the only in-market metric that calculates true authority on a topic, and we also do that at the page level. And when we're thinking about that, we're trying to model it like an ideal metric for the way that an off-page metric could be done, that doesn't only include links. One of the big problems in the market is we rely too heavily on arbitrary link metrics and their correlations. So for example, total links divided by total domains, domain link diversity, and our prediction relies on us kind of doing the work of saying, I'm about this topic. The people who have these links are about this other topic. When I'm talking about coverage, I'm saying I have the breadth of coverage that one would need to show that they understand everything about a particular topic. When I cover this specific topic with content, I'm doing so with in-depth, appropriate coverage from a depth and a quality perspective, so that every time I take a shot at this specific topic, it's illustrating that I actually know what I'm talking about. And that connects to my coverage of various keyword variants that connect to intents. I might answer the right questions, and all of that turns into kind of the package that I have for the world, that my site has for the world, or my site section has for the world on this specific topic. So when you encompass all of that, that represents the stuff that you can control, and then your authority is then driven by what's left. That's that off-page data set, which is primarily by citation, and by references and other expertise metrics. So combining those two things is absolutely necessary. especially because of how how the, not to get too super nerdy on it, but how logarithmic this is, right? If you're extremely authoritative on topics, you can get away with not being on the nose for intent. But if you're less authoritative, you have to be really on the nose with your content for and that divide's becoming more and more every day. Even in the June and July, updates. As things happen and as the world progresses and as the search engines get better at doing their jobs, this is only going to become wider and wider. The ability for somebody to get away with a page ranking for a term where the page doesn't satisfy the user's intent will go down over time dramatically, and to the point where it just won't happen all that much. And that's a better world for everyone. So the question, how does that connect to coverage? It's breadth, it's depth, it's how frequently do you write high quality content when you cover this, and what's your momentum on the topic. And when you combine those things, you can then start to predict success with content.
So predict success with content. What makes good content? What you can look at two pieces of content on the same type of topic, and clearly at times see one's really good and one not so good.
Well, one thing that one of the missions of MarketMuse is to set the standard for content quality. That's our literal mission of the business, and I always joke around. There's like a shadow mission. It's rid the world of bad content. You have to have some sort of quantifying factor. From our standpoint, we like to think step one of quantifying quality and comprehensiveness. So we're basically trying to identify what it means to be an expert on a topic, and say, if I were an expert on this topic, here's what I would have done if I was covering this specific intent, right? And how much does my content do that? At more intent fractured topics, right, or higher level topics, I may need an entire section of my site. I may need an entire cluster of content. So I've got to judge that not just on the page level. I got to judge that as a collective. And the punchline here is that's how the search engines evaluate authoritativeness. They evaluate it on a topic site section level. So what they're basically saying is, how authoritative is this site for this topic, this site section for this topic? And so that's the way that we think about it, and that's the way that we quantify it. It's just the same way. I want to know that if I've got an article about how do you get bees out of your garage, I'm truly covering all the stuff. I'm actually providing enough value such that, you're going to answer the right questions, include the right topics. It's going to be linked appropriately on your site, right? Because it makes sense that if I'm covering that I might be connecting myself to, insect repellent content that I've got, and also maybe some rafter repair stuff that I might have on my site, because that's probably where the bees are. I don't know. But yeah, basically you're trying to detail is your site representing the story that an expert would have told? And when you do that, you can start to quantify quality. There's other things though: production value, engagement, and those things must be part of the evaluation process. I don't get into that because I think there's enough need for the first side, and the analytics are sophisticated enough to drive parts 2 and 3.
So one thing that I see quite frequently, and I know that you see this as well, is people taking tools, and there's quite a few tools out there, and they'll put MarketMuse often in
the bucket,
in the same category, same bucket as these tools, and it's all about reverse engineering what's currently out there. Like, hey, we want to rank for this particular term. Great. Let's use a tool, and we're going to reverse engineer what's currently ranking, and that's going to tell us the the words to use, how long it should be, how many images should we use. Great, that's all we need to do, and we're going to have good content that's going to rank high in Google. How do you feel about that?
In practice, a lot like estimating your performance based on using search volume as your North Star. First of all, for that example, go look at your results, see how frequently you would have predicted your actual traffic, and then call me. But this is another one of those examples where it misses the goal of the search engines. It completely doesn't start to think about why organic search does what it does. It doesn't think about the challenge it is to run a search engine. It doesn't consider concepts like we just talked about, intent fracture, which we can get into, the two ways to think about intent fracture. It also doesn't account for the vast difference in the people in that search engine that result of their content packages, of their sites, their site structures, and how much content coverage they have on any one of those topics. So it's an extremely meaningful data set. The competitive search engine result page is an extremely meaningful data set, but it's not an extremely meaningful data set as a means of copying what's there. The most problematic things that I see for search engine optimization teams, and then also content teams who get bad advice on this, is where they're copying, let's say, regardless of any other metrics, they're copying the top 3 or 4 ranking pages on an organic search result. Oftentimes the yield on that is that they're writing content that has no clear intent. It merges intents in a way that's illogical or unnatural. Sometimes, sillily enough, when the Google favored intent is not just fractured intent, but it's also, there's meaning ambiguity, where like there's 2 meanings of the words. They'll actually use aggregated data from 2 different meanings of the same word altogether. I mean, there's so much chaos. But the one thing that burns the most when, this is the bucket, is you can't emulate your idols in organic search. You cannot be CBS. You cannot be Red Ventures. You cannot be Healthline tomorrow. And if you copy what they're doing, the pit of hell that you will fall in is very, very deep. They play a different game with different rules than you do. And so copying them can put you into a world of pain. And so, over and over again, I hear this. So what we do that's different is we go and we try to figure out what it means to be an expert on a topic. And then we overlay it against the organic search pages so that we can show you how these pages cover those topics. You can see what the table stakes things are, the things that would get you the invitation to the party, right? But also ways that you can really differentiate yourself. Like copying everyone or smushing together stuff can be, an interesting first step, but it's not correlative to success. And we've done this with massive data studies to illustrate it. Differentiation is correlated to success. Differentiation, when one covers an entire topic comprehensively, is correlated to success. And that's the truth. And so, it's one of these things that's a reality. People want a shortcut. People can understand keyword density and term frequency. And, will everybody get off that boat and realize that their path to win is by focusing on intent, focusing on quality, focusing on differentiation? Probably not. But one of the toughest things for us to do is to make sure to keep every day waking up in the morning and saying, just because 40 and counting tools out there do it in a way that actually hurts people over time doesn't mean we should change our messaging. And that's it. We have to focus on quality. We have to focus on comprehensiveness. What often happens when someone focuses on this is they get this great boost and that boost is short-lived. Over optimization, creating content that is poor for intent match. And what you often unfortunately see in these case studies is that those sites then crash and then those case studies disappear. Right? Or you see that the content that's being created actually has some subjective lens on it that's allowing it to maintain. But the true path is focusing on the customer, and the true path is focusing on expertise. And when you do those things, your longevity happens. The question I always ask folks is, does the person who's giving that advice, do they care about the longevity of their site? Or if their site were to crash tomorrow, would they just pick up and build a new one? You can't do that if you have a real brand. You can't risk it all on one page. And the way to not do that is to focus on quality, not tricking things. Stop tricking things. I'm done with that.
Well, and those tools, and I think you did imply that. I mean, tools like that do play a role.
Right.
But the question is, where in the process of content creation do they belong?
Right.
If you're using those tools up front, you're going to run into an issue. Right. If you start with that magic question that you brought up right in the beginning, why?
Right.
Like start with the why. Why are we creating this piece of content? What's the intent? Why do we deserve to have a voice in this particular area? Like, get all of that stuff on the table.
Yep.
That creates the right foundation. And you can use tools to help refine things as you go, but it starts with that why.
I so agree. That's why I use a lot of tools because I'm kind of, I use I use all different ones, anything that can give me a different perspective or inspire me. One thing I love to do is to look at a list of words and challenge my, team members or clients to build a narrative around them. The key is trying to focus on the people. Like even the most rudimentary early keyword tools were typically a list of keyword variants. So if it was CRM, CRM software, troubleshooting, CRM solution. And the story that you tell by abstracting variants is really key. So another example I give is when you see that in a search, like a list of keywords, maybe there's a bunch of cities as variants. It's CRM Albuquerque, it's CRM Topeka. It's not telling you to go write about Albuquerque and Topeka. It's telling you that people who are looking for CRM software, it's a terrible example. Maybe people who are looking for, a plumber, right, are thinking about that intent for their location. And so if you want to appeal to that term, you have to cover the locations that you serve. You have to be thinking about why you deserve to have local intent, not just thought leadership content or awareness-based content. Not just how do you fix that clogged drain, but it's why you're the plumber they should call if they live in Topeka. And those are the types of critical thinking skills that you're not going to get by just looking at a data set. You've got to process those lists of words and topics and turn them into a story. And that's how the SEO team shakes hands with the content strategist. It's by saying, it's not just here's the keyword list. It's the keyword list and weaving that together into a narrative. And the closest you can do with that, with automation, really is to, focus on expertise. And when you just look at a, keyword density, it rips the heart out of the editors, out of the editor. It eliminates the need for the narrative. And it just focuses on the word peppering in words. Just stings me up. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Definitely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a slight detour here and talk about something else that I think is really important. So, you have a lot of growth stage companies, maybe they're earlier in terms of their product to market. They're looking at competition. They see the content and the competition is created, and they're overwhelmed because the competition's been creating content for a while. Now there's a lot of catch up, right? So, okay, we need to produce a lot of content, but we need to produce high quality content that shows our expertise. So how can we balance that quality and content, which are the quality and quantity aspects of content development, and what are some ways that people can develop quality content while still at a fairly rapid pace of producing content?
I think the thing that increases the confidence level on a smaller team who is looking at a daunting task is that first step we talked about a bit ago. So that predictive layer is saying, like, are we confident? So content confidence is something that I say a lot. And it's, are we confident that our plan is going to have a high percentage win rate? And why are we confident in that data set? The second is really making sure that we put our best foot forward with every page that we create. So it may be adopting a framework for content briefing to make sure that we don't have any content created that doesn't meet the needs or gets stuck in a feedback loop, slows down our process, or just won't perform at the best of its ability. There's also, not so much a fringe anymore, but of generation. So generation of content is not fiction anymore. It can start to be something that inspires you to speed up your process. You can use draft generations in order to inspire content writers or subject matter experts to improve their speed at which they can get something into publication.
And just to clarify, by generation, you mean generating content through some type of machine learning.
Right. So natural language generation.
Some type of model.
Right. Natural language, creating a language model, tuning it appropriately, and using it in a way that acts as a inspirational component of that same workflow, where you may look at your existing process and you can only knock out as a small team, you can only knock out 4 to 5 articles this month. But based on your research, that you should put out 25 or 30. And it's a requirement of your team. If you're listening to this podcast or this show, it's a requirement of your team that every content item that you produce is awesome. I mean, it's got to be the best. There's no reason not to publish content that isn't equal to or better than your competitors every time from the standpoint of quality and comprehensive because of the technology you have. So it's what things would speed that up, right? And taking out the need for you will always need to evaluate, you will always need to enhance, improve production value of any data set that you get, any draft materials you get, whether it's from an outsourcer that you got off of a content network or content that's generated with natural language generation language model. You've got to take that and consider it building blocks and think about, is this accelerating my workflows yet? Is this a fit for the way that my team works? Is this a fit for me so that I can use that to inspire me to write faster, to get more out the door? Because if you're a small team and you've done your competitive cohort analysis and you've said, okay, we need to own this topic, but to do so, we have to write 55 articles on these topics. With our current team, that's going to take us a year and a half. Well, we might decide not to do it. I mean, it's just, maybe there's other ways. Maybe we just go buy traffic if it's going to take us that long. So are there ways to speed that up? There are. We can outsource. We can go, find people. We can try to figure out other mechanisms that can be that firecracker to get more stuff done. And we can also begin to adopt repurposing strategies and other things like that. And when the teams start to think critically about components of inefficiency as well as post-publish creative solutions, that's when you can start to chop down the tree. When you're a small team who's growing, you can start to kind of put points on the board against a competitor. The other thing, I teach competitive cohort processes. It's my most favorite thing. It's to always look at their efficiencies. Nothing feels better than competing against a competitor who is not covering the topic anymore, or they're totally inefficient, 10% efficiency, let's just say. So every 10 articles they write, only one of them works. And you walk into that game and you're shooting 40% and 50%. Because you can like get everybody really revved up to start executing, because you're operating 4x, 5x what they are from day one. And that's what this type of data can provide. It can really take a team who's used to, failing 90% of the time, and make that number 30, 40, 50%. And then everybody is like jumping up and down every time you hit publish. And that's a really great feeling. So.
And, talking about using, tools to help generate content, we can also look at that content production life cycle, right? So starting with researching and planning and prioritizing, creating briefs, eventually getting into writing. And, our goal, at a company would always be, let's take a look at that life cycle and let's see, at least one of the goals, where can we add efficiency?
Yes.
In each of those steps? Because if we just add a little bit of efficiency in each of those steps, right?
Yes.
Huge win for us.
Yeah, and that is your deadly weapon when you're assessing an entire content team. It's to say, where do you whiff? Where do you whiff more? Where's your loss? And sadly enough, what a lot of times happens is your some of the basic inefficiencies are because you're telling people who shouldn't be doing a particular type of work to do it. A lot of writers are burdened with keyword research. They're not SEOs, right? A lot of times prioritization is done in a very weak way that produces low quality outputs, maybe sort descending by search volume. The most common content plan strategy these days, and it always has been. Or you don't create content briefs that create that single source of truth for your writers, and you outsource, or even if you insource. And so when you get that content, it takes you 2 or 3 feedback loops. Nothing's more inefficient than writer to editor feedback loops, or writer to editor to SEO edit feedback loops, because the inefficiency is it's slowing me down now, but the true inefficiency is that it's decreasing the trust on that team. And so that the next time, stuff just grinds to a slow halt, and they start to produce the content slower, especially because they're just you're taking the love out of it. You're making it so that they feel misunderstood. So the more you can get on the same page with your writers earlier, they know these are the guardrails. Please at least hit these, and then be creative with the rest of your time. I've taken the need for you to do keyword research out of this. I've already built a potential structure. Add to this. Be creative. If you at least do this stuff, I'm probably not going to edit this that much, and we don't have to edit it for search because it's already. By the fact that it's authoritative, it's and expert driven, it's already going to be optimized. And so it takes these kind of archaic steps out of the bag, and then the post-publish optimization becomes really fun because you're looking at data. And by the way, the best teams in the world, if you want to separate them for writing teams, it's the ones that update content. But do you have an update cadence? Do you have an update reasons? Do you know what you're doing when you update content? And that's what I see over and over again. But we're updating this content item because a bunch of users who came through this page were looking for this specific intent, and our page doesn't satisfy it, so we're adding it to the page. Everybody's like, sweet, everybody can get behind that. Or we need another page to support this page that will satisfy this intent. We're updating this page to be more current, right? Or we're updating this page to, to be more, just cover this topic more comprehensively, to differentiate against our ever-changing competitive landscape, right? The update cadence and the update process really can change teams. And the cool thing is, it's the fastest way to grow traffic. Punchline.
And And the updating, that's the end result
Right.
of having an intentional feedback loop, right?
Yes.
Where
Yeah.
you're publishing content
Mm-hmm.
and you are continuously looking at that content, or at least that content that's important to your company.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes priorities change.
Right.
You know, what's working, what's not working? Are we hitting our goals?
Yep.
If so, why? Like, what did we do really well so
Yes.
we can replicate that going forward? And if it's not hitting our goals, how do we tweak it? How do we make adjustments? Because often that's all that's required is that updating. You don't have to start from scratch.
I know.
Like, just update existing content.
People are so afraid, though. They're afraid to touch. Yeah. They're afraid to touch their winners. They're afraid of the cannibalization boogeyman, which, you know, that's a whole story for another topic, I guess. But it's to say, guess what? This page isn't perfect. If you think it's perfect, then you probably have a problem already. You need to touch it. It needs to be refined. If it is over, if you need to have a metric for your business that no page should be more than X traffic of your site. If you do, you want winners to put their heads up and stick their heads up. You don't want to cut that head off. You know, I call it a hand without an arm. A lot of times you see sites, they've got hands, lots of traffic over here, and there's no support structure because they're so afraid to build it. You got to, if you get a winner like that, you got to continuously build around it, continuously build on semantically related topics, continuously focus on various target markets. So like if you own a guide, well, talk to your sales team. What industries do we serve in this specific topic? Okay, well, I'm going to go write a guide for each one of those industries, right? Do you typically get people that are beginners who think about this topic as well as experts? Well, it's a mixed bag. The sales team might say, okay, well, I'm going to go write the beginner's guide to this as well as the expert's guide to this. So you're starting to think about ways that you can support this. Or the forgotten part of the journey is post-purchase, right? Post-purchase troubleshooting. What content do your customers want to read so that they become advocates, so that they become brand ambassadors, and they're still about the same topic, So no matter what, update and support. You got to update, and then you got to continuously think, where can I expand my coverage? How can I support my hand and build the arm? And that's really or a tooth without a jaw. I've also used that one before.
Well, and what you're describing is the flywheel concept
Absolutely.
As well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think people are familiar with, but in the world of content, that's super important to take the flywheel concept and apply those concepts to your very best content.
Absolutely. It show them you know them, right? From your target audience perspective. But it's also, what was our path to creating this amazing cluster or this amazing, lead generating like beast? Is that repeatable on other topics? Why not, or why? And what can we do to do more of that example? It's not throwing darts, and unfortunately, a lot of times it's copy someone else or throw darts is all. If you really look at the whys on a lot of content teams, those are the two. Or just bad advice, only write to the bottom of the funnel because that's where the leads come from. Things like that, where it's just like, you're really not getting it, folks, because you're not controlling the narrative. You're not controlling their whole journey.
That's great. Any other tips or advice you want to share before we start wrapping up here? You've given a lot, so don't feel like you have to add more. It's been a lot of good stuff.
One thing I'll mention, and this is, I'm actually saying this very frequently lately, is the maturity of the market, the product maturity in the market matters for anything that you're going to introduce to your team. And if you're thinking about using natural language generation in this workflow, recognize that no one is ready for this, right? No one is ready to look at a draft that's, generated by machine learning, generated by a language model, and naturally use it as this wonderful Play-Doh data set that then allows them to instantly know exactly how to use that to improve their content process. Stop thinking it's going to be a magic box that instantly enables your team, all the different types of people. First of all, some people are going to be scared of it. Some people are going to think it's evil and going to take their jobs. Some people are going to use that bias to judge it harshly when it's not something to be judged harshly, but recognize that maturity isn't there. It's like the first day that anyone ever used a grammar checker, right? There was a legion of editors that were like, oh my gosh, that's what I do all day. I fix grammar. It's going to ruin our lives, right? But now a grammar checker is like natural and like baked into your life, most likely. But there was a time when that wasn't a mature workflow either. In content optimization, like you talked about, the first time someone ever saw that and it was like, hey, you were writing about content marketing strategy and you didn't talk about buyer personas or target audiences. That's stuff that an expert would have covered. First time you saw that, it was like super unnatural. It's like, hey, don't tell me what to write. But then when you like, oh, wow, that was a super blind spot for me. I really do need sections of my article about that. And then you did it. And then the page did better. You were like, oh my gosh, that's wonderful. But now the next tier of maturity is this. So you've got those people on the tip of the iceberg who they got it and they're adapting it into their teams. But that is such a small fraction. And trust me, as somebody who's been trying to build this product for over 4 years, don't think your team's going to adopt this quickly. It is a early stage maturity solution. To get them to this, you got to take the judgment out of their brain. Your goal is not to judge this. Your goal is to think about ways you can use it. It's a tool. It's a tool like anything else. It comes out in the form of draft content, but what its goal is to do is to accelerate your creativity, give your writers more time to focus on production value, to focus on exhibiting their expertise, and achieving your goals of comprehensive coverage that completes the buy cycle for your business and for your users, and really shows the world that you are kind of like everything for the entire journey. But don't expect that to happen overnight. That's my biggest step of advice, and it's the biggest thing that I see people abandoning it quickly because it's not a secret weapon. It's not an overnight success. But guess what? In any business, in any technology, nothing's an overnight win. And this technology is no different. It's not a magic box.
I think that's great. And it will be a competitive advantage to companies at some point, probably fairly soon.
Right.
I don't think we're that far away from being able to use that technology. And it's not going to replace writers. And I think that's an important part here. It's there will be certain writers who will learn how to adapt and leverage this technology to be even better at what they do.
Exactly.
And if you're a company and you find those people and you train and you invest in helping them learn and develop those skills, it's going to give you a fairly long-term advantage here.
Exactly right. It's leveling up the game and making it so that, one of our missions I joke around about is, rid the world of bad content. Well, it's making it super, super hard to have a job where you write bad content. I want that out of the world. And what that just makes everything better. It makes all boats rise. And I think that, like you said, it's finding the talent that can be, almost superhuman, is what you should be focused on.
Yeah. Sweet. Nice. Appreciate it. In wrapping up here, I do want to make sure that we plug the event that you'll be speaking at. I'll be speaking at. Joining us will be 11 more amazing marketers. It's called The Business of Content. It's going to be on August 26th. It's a virtual event all day. I think we have 12 sessions lined up. You can go to thebusinessofcontent.events to get a ticket. If you're listening to this or watching this after August 26th, still go to that URL because we'll have recordings up there that people will be able to download. And I'm excited to hear more from you then. It'll be a fantastic event, and this has been fantastic and super helpful. And I really appreciate the perspective that you have. So you're an interesting guy. I like talking to interesting
Thanks,
people.
Lloyd.
So
I think it's going to be an amazing event.
Yeah.
Amazing event. It's got, the lineup is just folks that know content and how to make it work. And I don't think there's been a lineup that's been more tight. So I'm really excited to be part of it.
Sweet. Thank you. With that, I appreciate you. I appreciate people listening and watching. But Jeff, thanks for joining us. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do at MarketMuse next.
Cheers.
Be
Thanks,
fun.
Ken.
All right. Take care.
You've been listening to The Business of Content. If you're a decision maker in your organization or growing companies, we hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at thebusinessofcontent.fm. That's thebusinessofcontent.fm. And for more where content marketing meets finance and operations, go to www.contentramp.com. Till next time, this is The Business of Content.